I am able to see in my mind's eye body parts internally with
Today's
permission, of
guest
course.
is psychic medium and medical intuitive Julie
That
Ryan.
I've learned over the past 30 years is when we connect with spirit, we can do it all. And so I describe myself as a businesswoman and an inventor who learned how to do woo-woo, and I'm a buffet of psychicness.
Julie Ryan can sense what medical conditions and illnesses a person has and facilitate energetic healings. She can communicate with spirits, both alive and dead. Julie can scan animals, access people's past lives, and she can tell how close to death someone
And
is.
when he was 4, he was with his family at their lake house, and he was in the water with his mom. And his mom was holding him, and he said, "Mommy, you're my favorite mommy of all my mommies." And she said, "Well, honey, I'm your only mommy." He goes, "No, mom, you're my favorite of all my mommies." And she said, "Well, honey, I'm your only mommy. What are you talking about?" And he said, "Mom," he was getting a little annoyed with her because she wasn't getting it. Kind of like, "How do you not know this?" He said, "Mom, babies are born to a mommy and a daddy, and then they grow up, and then they die, and then they come back and they're born to another mommy and
If
daddy."
you want to learn how I went from being a skeptical atheist who thought there was zero chance of an afterlife to a skeptical atheist who thinks an afterlife is highly probable, come check out my books. WTF just happened. Everyone, today I have a guest who has a very interesting story. This is Julie Ryan. She's a psychic medium and medical intuitive. So, welcome. I'm so excited to have you on.
Oh, thanks for having me. My delight to be here with you today.
And thank you for coming on. I so appreciate it. And I think you're the first medical intuitive we've had on. So that'll be a very interesting conversation. Um, so I want to ask you, what you first just I think everyone knows what a psychic medium is. What exactly is a medical intuitive?
Here's my definition of a medical intuitive. I am able to see in my mind's eye body parts internally with permission, of course. I always ask permission from my client, or I have a call in show every Thursday night, Ask Julie Ryan, and people call in from all over the world. We did it last night, and it's always so much fun, Liz, because I never know who's going to call. I never know what they're going to ask. And so I'm like a human MRI when it comes to the medical intuitive thing. And I can see in my mind's eye broken bones, torn ligaments, viral infections, bacterial infections. I can see cancer. I can see metastasized cancer. I can see mold exposure. What's the allergic thing that's causing a reaction in the body? And then as soon as something's identified, then I watch a energetic healing that happens. And that can take the form of something getting added, something getting removed. I watch procedures all the time that emulate what I saw in the operating room for decades. I'm an inventor of surgical devices and former manufacturer of surgical devices that are sold throughout the world. Sometimes I see healings that utilize methodologies and devices that haven't been invented yet. And regardless of whatever I'm seeing in my mind's eye, I'm very descriptive with my client or my caller, because if they can envision it, it helps integrate the healing into the body, because the body's always going to follow what the brain tells it, even if the brain doesn't believe it to be true. May I give you an example of that?
Yes, I
Well,
was going to ask you.
well,
So
we've
maybe
we've all watched movies where they were really sad, or they were really scary, or suspenseful, or something like that, and we had a physical reaction to it. So think of the movie I like to use an example of a sad movie is Terms of Endearment, that I think was out in the 80s. And I was on a first date with this guy, and I was sitting in the movie theater, and I remember holding my breath because I thought, oh my God, if I breathe, I'm just going to wail. I'm going to start crying, and, I'll be sobbing, and I don't want to disturb anybody else in the theater. And I think that's a great example of we've all watched movies where there was some sad part. Well, we know it's pretend, we know it's Hollywood magic, and yet we feel like crying or we do cry. We do shed a tear or we cry. So I think that's a great example of how that works.
And you said, well, first of all, I'm just going to ask one really random thing. Was
Yeah.
everyone sobbing in the theater? I saw that movie
Oh,
and I
yeah.
luckily saw it at home and I was sobbing. I would think everyone would have been
Yeah.
wailing and you
I don't
would,
remember that they were because we were in
yeah.
a theater. I think maybe at home it's a little bit, we can control it a little bit more. But oh my
Yeah.
goodness. I
Oof.
that of all the sad movies I've ever seen, that one just really sticks in my head because it as Oprah would say, it was an ugly cry. It would have been an ugly cry.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I saw it once. I saw it a few, like it's kind of a while ago now, over 10 years, and it's embedded in my brain, that movie. And
Yeah,
yeah, I mean, I think as most people listening know, that is part of life. You know, a lot of people who've had losses come to this. So
right.
yeah.
Exactly. So I learned how to do all this stuff, Liz. What I've learned over the past 30 years is when we connect with spirit, we can do it all. And so I describe myself as a businesswoman and an inventor who learned how to do woo-woo, and I'm a buffet of psychicness because once we connect with spirit, somebody that calls into my show or that I have in a private session, we can talk to your dead grandma, we can talk to your pet, we can talk to any spirit that's either deceased or attached to a body. I can scan you medically, help facilitate energetic healings. We can do past life stuff. We can talk to your angels, your spirit guides. It's all the same thing. It's all energy. And I find that in the woo-woo space, kind of like think of doctors. We got the cardiologists and the neurologists and the gynecologists and all of those different specialties, but they're all working on the same body. And same with spirit. Once we connect with spirit, it seems in this space we have the mediums, and then we have the medical people and the medical intuitives, and then we have the pet psychics and the past life people. It's all spirit. There's no reason why it needs to be siloed. And that's been my experience, and that's what I teach.
So I'm sure I'll have more questions about that. I want to ask you, you said you had dreams about future medical devices. Was there ever a device you dreamt of then that was then built? And if so, what was it?
I don't know that I've had dreams of medical devices when I was in that
Or yeah,
industry. I had ideas come into my head. I
ideas.
wasn't dreaming, but it was before I learned how to do woo woo.
Mhm.
So we all come in with the ability, and then we just develop and enhance it over the years. And the more we utilize it, the more it just becomes second nature. And we've all experienced this. We all experience it pretty much every day. We all have times where we think of somebody, and then I just had it this morning. I woke up, I was thinking about a girlfriend. I called her on my walk this morning. She goes, "Oh my God, I can't believe you're calling me today because here's what's going on. I woke up thinking of you." Well, yeah, I woke up thinking of her too. That's telepathic communication, that's intuition. And all of us have had situations where we think of somebody and then we either hear from them via phone or text or email, or sometimes we run into them if they live in the same town. And we say, "Oh my gosh, what a coincidence. I was just thinking of you." Well, there's no coincidence there. That's your intuitive ability at play. And everybody has it. Little children are really good at it.
So when did you first realize you were a medical intuitive as well as a psychic medium? And were
Well,
those
I
two different
know that, like, as I
instances?
mentioned, it's all the same thing. It's all connecting with spirit, but I didn't realize it. I did not have dead people chasing me as a child, or if I did, I wouldn't have known what to do with that information. And what I did was, one of my girlfriends gave me a book called Anatomy of the Spirit by Carolyn Mace. And she called herself a medical intuitive. And I thought, well, what the heck's that? I'd been in the medical industry on the supply side of the equation for quite a while at that point. And I wanted to do more, wanted to know more. So we didn't have the internet yet. So I went to a bookstore to see what other information I could find. And I found a book called Hands of Light by Barbara Brennan, who's a former NASA physicist who parlayed very complex quantum physics principles into understandable English for the non-scientific mind, that would be me, to help facilitate healing. And it was fascinating because I was all about, helping people heal, helping the doctors help their patients, helping the surgeons, helping medical providers. And so I called her school, which was on Long Island at the time. She's deceased now. Barbara Brennan's deceased. And I said, do you guys have anybody teaching this stuff in my area? And sure enough, they did. And so I studied with her for 6 years and learned how to do all of this stuff. So now I teach people from all over the world in person. Once a year, we do a training in person. It'll be November 1st through the 3rd in Atlanta this year. And then I do one online as well. And that we just had that in May of how to do the whole buffet of psychicness. And it has progressed to the point in the past 40 years. That's when Barbara Brennan's book came out 40 years ago, where this information that took me 6 years to learn and understand, people get it within a weekend now. It's kind of like going from the carrier pigeons to a text. It used to take a long time to communicate with somebody over a vast distance. Now it's instantaneous anywhere around the globe. And so it's so much fun because people think, oh, I'm really interested in this stuff, but I don't think I'm going to be able to do it. And then when they can do it, like right out of the gate, they're saying, holy Moses, how can this be? But it's fun to watch it unfold for them.
Oh, it must be. Because I mean, I know as myself, someone I never even believed any of this. And I still don't consider myself someone who really has these abilities, but there are a few moments while studying it from a scientific perspective where I had instances happen, and it's so life-changing. And I would think to teach someone and watch them have it must feel really good, because we're just so shocked when it happens when we're the kind of people who don't think it could.
Well, everybody has it. And then we all go, that's just my imagination. That's not really real. But then when you understand how it works, and little children, as I mentioned, Liz, we all come in with the ability, and little children are very, very good at this. They don't even know it's a thing until somebody says, oh, honey, that's not really real. That's just your imagination. And they learn to tone it down or turn it off. But oh my gosh, the stories about little children and the things they come up with. I hear them almost daily from my clients.
Well, is there an amazing one you can share?
Yeah, several. One in particular, my girlfriend's grandson, his name's Walter. And when he was 4, he was with his family at their lake house, and he was in the water with his mom. And his mom was holding him, and he said, Mommy, you're my favorite mommy of all my mommies. And she said, well, honey, I'm your only mommy. He goes, no, Mom, you're my favorite of all my mommies. And she said, well, honey, I'm your only mommy. What are you talking about? And he said, Mom, he was getting a little annoyed with her because she wasn't getting it. Kind of like, how do you not know this? He said, Mom, babies are born to a mommy and a daddy, and then they grow up, and then they die, and then they come back and they're born to another mommy and daddy. And you're my favorite of all my mommies. And so she's calling her mom, who's my friend, and my mom's calling me going, okay, my daughter wants to know what the heck's going on. And that's what prompted me to write my children's books, because I've had so many moms and grandmothers in particular over the years, Liz, that have said, can you help me explain to my child how he knows information about my deceased grandfather, who was dead 20 years before this child was ever born? And little Johnny says, no, granddad comes and plays with me at night in my room, and we play trains. And he knows information about the granddad that there's no way he could know. And then the other thing I get a lot is, how does my child know information about past lives that we can corroborate the information with historic documents online? And this kid can't read yet. And then lastly, how do I explain to my child that grandma is in heaven now, And little Susie's saying, no, she's not. She's asleep in that box in the front of the room because they're at the visitation hours at the funeral home. So that's what prompted my four children's books, the Angel Messages series, and they're darling. They're picture books, and it helps kids understand, the spiritual stuff. In addition to fun things like, you give a dog treats and it'll roll over, and cats like to climb trees and things like that.
Right. And it must give kids so much comfort. Like, I mean, not only is it happening, but, if you have to explain death to a kid, if, a loved one passes, a grandparent, a great grandparent, sadly,
Yeah.
someone closer to their age, and you can explain, they're just in a different dimension instead of, well, you'll never see them again. Yeah. I mean, just
Right.
you can help
Well,
kids process.
and with my children's books, I have a friend who she was an advisor on PBS, like on Sesame Street and Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood and stuff like that before her current job. She did that for 20 years. And so I wrote the manuscript and then I sent it to her, and she tweaked a word here or there so that it would be easily understood by a very small child. And what we found is that not only do the children benefit from this, but so do their parents and their grandparents who are reading it to them, because it's just real basic concepts. But I wanted to be very clear with these little children so that it would be on the level where they could grasp it. And they don't know that there's anything wrong with seeing spirits or being able to communicate with spirits, because we all come in with the ability until somebody tells us, oh, that's not really real. Well, yeah, it
Right.
is. Yeah, just because
Right.
grown-ups can't see it doesn't mean the kid can't see it.
And there seems to be something in neuroscience or research about when you're told something is true versus not, you stop seeing it. I mean, I know I cover this in my first book. There's a study with blue, the color blue, where people didn't know blue existed until there was a word for it. Or you go to tribes that don't have a word for the color blue and they can't distinguish between blues and greens, shades that the rest of us can. I mean, I don't know what to even say when I hear stories like that. So it just changes our whole sense of reality and how our brain only shows us this tiny portion of reality that we're taught instead of reality. So,
Well, and then you take it a step further with what's the emotion connected with whatever that object is. And when you were just mentioning that about blue, first of all, I thought about the blue dress that a lot of people couldn't see that it looked blue.
mm,
It looked like a different color when that was running around on social media several years ago. But even further, when it comes to emotion, I what came into my head was a picture of a gargoyle. Well, most of us in the Western world have been taught gargoyles are scary. They're like, whoa, what is this? Is this a monster? They're
right.
protecting the manor or the room or the person. And yet, if you took a gargoyle picture or a gargoyle statue to somebody perhaps that grew up in an indigenous tribe somewhere that had never seen it before, they hadn't been taught to be scared of it, be afraid of it. And so they might say, ooh, that's interesting. What kind of dog is that? I haven't seen that before. They don't know that they're supposed to be afraid of it. So,
Mm,
yeah, it's interesting how the brain works.
right. And I actually want to ask you, backing up sort of to the beginning, when did you first get either and or psychic medium information or medical intuitive? Do you have a memory of a time where you're like, just like, wait, what? Where is this coming from? What is this? And wait, it's verified. Just something where it began to first
Mhm.
come in.
Yeah. Well, again, I learned how to do all of this stuff. So I have lots of stories about how it came in, the visuals came in. But even before that, during the Oklahoma City bombing in the it's probably in the early 90s, I think is when that happened. One of my best friends from childhood, we've been friends since we were 10. Her name's Patty. And I talk about this in my book, Angelic Attendants. She worked in downtown Oklahoma City. She's a lawyer. And I was living in Los Angeles at the time, and I had the news on. I was getting ready to go to a meeting or something. So I was getting dressed. I had the news on. Well, the bombing had just happened. And of course, we're a couple of hours ahead on Pacific time. Oklahoma's in Central time. And I got this feeling like, oh my God, Patty's been hurt. And so I tried to call her and there was no answer on her cell phone. I called her home. The nanny picked up. She said, I haven't heard from her. She hadn't heard from her husband. She said, I don't know what to tell you. I said, all right. So I ran downstairs and I said to my husband, there's been a bombing in Oklahoma City and I know Patty's been hurt. And he looked at me like I was nuts. And he said, well, have you talked to her? I said, no, she's not answering her phone. I said, I know she's been hurt. And I started tearing up. And he's like, you are crazy. You don't, you don't know that. Just be calm and see what happened. Well, fast forward a couple of hours, her nanny called me back and she said, she has been hurt. She's in the emergency room. She's alive. So I got to talk to her later in the day. And what had happened was her office was in the building across the street. The explosion happened. She remembered seeing the van with all the explosives in it. And she always could look down on the playground of the nursery where these children were in the Murrah building, I think is what it was called. It was a federal building. And so she said the explosion happened. Her window I think she was on the 8th floor, blew in. She was sitting with her back to her window. It forced her head down on the desk. The ceiling collapsed on the back of her head. And she had like, I don't know, 62 stitches in the back of her head. But the fact that she had her suit jacket on really saved her from being much more injured. And she survived. But the fact that I knew she'd been hit, I knew she'd been injured, not hit, she'd been injured. I don't know how I knew that, but how do you know that you think of somebody and you run into them? At
Right.
the grocery store. It's the same thing and we all have it. And then over the years when I started studying this stuff and studying how to do it, then colors and figures and lines started showing up in my head, especially with the medical stuff, because that's what really brought me into this. That was my first interest. That's what led me to study this stuff. And I started seeing colors, and then I started seeing grids, like lines on an architectural drawing. And then I started eventually being able to see body parts, and I could see disease, and then things would look a certain way. And I learned over time, okay, that's my symbol for whatever is happening. I'm looking at a liver. A healthy liver looks pink. A diseased liver looks brown or black. I know what cancer looks like, all of that. And at the same time, when I'm seeing things in my mind's eye, Liz, I get information downloaded into my head. I call those divine downloads. And so, I got this running commentary of spirit working through me and with me to help the person heal. And I'm getting information downloaded, and then I'm seeing things and watching the healing and describing it.
Um, and when you're getting this information, I know you said it, you get a lot of visual, like it's an MRI. Do you
Yeah.
physically feel okay? Do you ever start to feel sicknesses in you?
No, I
Oh, good,
don't.
good. That's good.
However, I did because I communicate telepathically with spirit, whether they're attached to a body or not. And I was asked to communicate with this man that was really evil. I mean, he was alive, but he was like terrorist level evil. And when I was communicating with him and I was getting information from him, I really did feel nauseous communicating with him because his energy was so toxic. Now, there's no such thing as evil spirits. It's a part he was playing in this lifetime. We all play different roles based on what our spirit comes in to explore and experience. But the whole evil spirit concept is totally made up and nonsense. It's been used to control the masses since the beginning of time with fear.
So was he in a prison? I'm just curious how you ended up even getting connected and why to such an evil person, or was it you had no idea he behaves really surface well presented and you were shocked, or was it like, hey, this man's in prison, can you help in some way?
No, he wasn't in prison. I was talking to a law enforcement officer and they were trying to find him. And so I was helping them with latitude and longitude coordinates of where he was, in what area he was in. But our heads are big satellite dishes. They receive and transmit frequencies, and we can communicate with any spirit, whether it's attached to a body having a human experience or whether it's in heaven, because everybody goes to heaven. All spirits go to heaven. There was a movie out in the 80s, I think, called All Dogs Go to Heaven. Well, all people go to heaven too, regardless of what we've been taught in our Western, religions and cultures and societies. Everybody's spirit goes to heaven because every spirit's pure love. That's a big concept. That was a big concept for me to wrap my head around. It's a big concept for a lot of people to wrap their head around. Like what you were talking about earlier about, we're taught something and then it lays that neural pathway of that way of thinking in our brains. So I was talking with him telepathically, and it got so bad, Liz, that I said, okay, I don't want to do this anymore because I'm afraid I'm going to throw up. His energy was so toxic. Now, will his spirit go to heaven? Absolutely. When he gets to heaven, will there be like, he has to go burn in hell for a while? No, it's a part he was playing in this lifetime. So when I'm talking with a client or a caller into my show and they say, oh my gosh, this person in my life is so awful, I say, remember, it's a part they're playing in this lifetime. You're learning from it. They're learning from it. We don't know what their spirit came in to explore and experience. And when you're with them in heaven, you can hand them an Oscar statue and say, okay, you get leading role as an awful person. You get an Academy Award here, because that's what's going on.
Stand from what I've heard of people who've been to the other side and came back, they go through a life review. So you are in that sense accountable and then go into the next non-physical dimension where I guess we can't really say what we know. If I could guess, it somehow ties into string theory, quantum particles. I'm not going to pretend to say I know what is involved. Some physicists are looking into it a little bit, but so life reviews have you heard that people before transitioning to non-physical states, they have life reviews. Have you?
I have. I've heard it.
Yeah.
I've heard it from near-death experiencers that they have kind of a life review. I've also heard it from many spirits when they're already in heaven and they've transitioned. But the other thing that I've heard, which is interesting about that, we're going to look at this from a human perspective, and we need to, because we're here to have the human experience. And what I've heard from billions of spirits over the years, Liz, is there's no right or wrong. There's no good or bad in the spirit world. It's just an experience. So in that life review, spirits don't have emotion. Spirits are just saying, oh, that was interesting. When I did that, this is how it affected others. So we're looking at it from a spirit standpoint in a very neutral way. Because you think about it, thoughts are vibrations. We bring them in from the ethers, and then all thoughts are neutral when they get into our head, and we assign a meaning to them. Back to the gargoyle example. I see a gargoyle and I think, whoa, somebody living in the middle of the Amazon may see a gargoyle and say, oh, isn't that interesting? They don't know to be afraid of it. So when we're going through something that's less than optimal or even horrific or heart-wrenching, if we're losing a loved one or something else happens, our spirits, our angels, our deceased loved ones are watching us with a sense of curiosity and wonder, saying, wonder what Liz is going to do next. What is she going to create out of this situation? How is she going to navigate this? What is her spirit learning from this?
You mentioned like thoughts will come into your head. They're neither negative nor positive. And I come in a sense that like, it depends if you act on it. Like you can't help what pops in your head. Like it comes, let's say something comes in your head. You're like, oh my God, I could use like $1 million and I don't want to work. It would be great if I could rob a bank. I mean, we all have those little fantasies. You're like, oh, I wish I could just walk it, but you don't go do it. Right. Or you're like, this person drives me nuts. I just want to like punch them in the face. Don't do it.
Right.
And even like worse thoughts, like you can't fault a person if they have a thought of murdering someone and they don't do it. And they're like, oh, the thoughts pop in. That would be horrific. I feel sick at the thought of doing that to another human or animal or And but then isn't the acting on that thought a form of evil? Am I wrong, or I don't know if you've gotten any information on that from.
We have evil in our human experience, and in the spirit world, it's an experience. Evil is not good or bad. It's just an experience, and it gives us an experience. Let me give you an example. I do a lot of work with past lives. Past lives, I'll see a semblance of a script that will mosey through multiple lifetimes. For instance, you want to be a teacher. Well, there are a bazillion ways to be a teacher. Many people are teachers in multiple ways in one lifetime. You may be a school teacher, you may be a business teacher then, and then maybe you're a parent and you're teaching, and maybe you're aerobics instructor and you're teaching people in a class. There are multiple ways to do that. I will see a script and many, many subscripts. We all come in with things we want to explore and experience each lifetime. And that's why we choose our parents, where we're born, when we're born, to whom we're born, and the circumstances into which we're born, so that our lives will have a trajectory that will allow us to explore whatever these scripts are. And I talk in analogies a lot, Liz. Obviously, you've figured that out by now. And it's just to give our human minds a frame of reference. My analogy for past lives is, think of Hamlet. How many times has Hamlet been performed since Shakespeare wrote it in 1602? Well, who knows? But same script, and you think about all the variables that were involved. Where was it performed? In what language? In what year? What was happening in the world? Who was the director? Who were the actors? Who was the costumer? Was it performed inside, outside, in a theater, in an amphitheater, outside, in somebody's home? There's so many variables, different perspectives of the same basic script. And that's how I think of our life experiences and how they tie into what our spirit came in to experience and explore in this lifetime, and how does it relate to perhaps many of our past lifetimes. It's really fascinating to see how it's all kind of like a spider web, and it's all connected with these different lifetimes.
And so you do past life regressions. Is there a story that I don't want you to violate client privacy, so tell me if you don't want me to ask this. But if so, is there a story that most blew you away during one of your regressions?
Oh, thousands of them. Because I always say, I can't make this stuff up. I mean, I'm not that creative. I had one this morning that was fun. And I was working with a man who has some illnesses happening right now. And there's always an emotional component in play before any kind of disease or illness manifests. And so when I am looking for what's the emotional component, I'm looking at the energy field membrane, and I'll explain that here in a minute. But there's a tear or hole in the energy field membrane. That's the container that holds the energy that makes up our body and our spirit. Reminds me of really thin, stretchy saran wrap. So I'll see a tear or hole. And in this guy's case, he had a hole in his membrane, and it was like if you shrug your shoulders and that indentation in your collarbone between your neck and your collarbone, if you do that, like that's where it was on the left side. And it was about the size of maybe a golf ball. So I envisioned myself going into that, and I was shown this scene of this Franciscan monk. I knew he was Franciscan because he had a brown robe on, dark brown robe, and it was belted at the waist with a rope, and he had sandals on, and he had his hood up, like the monks can wear their hood ups. He was holding a torch. He was going down these stone steps, and he was going into some catacombs. And I thought, oh, this is going to be interesting. What's going on here? And I could see the torches on the wall, to illuminate the path. And there were many, many stairs. And then once he got down to where the stairs ended, then it was just a dirt path, but it was underground. It had been tunneled out. And he came to a room, and there were several
Can
other.
I ask you one quick question, just so people can have a clear view? Are you seeing this and telling it to him, or is he seeing this? Okay, so
no,
it comes
I'm
to
seeing
you.
it.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
No, I'm seeing it and telling it to him. because I call this a past life scan. There's no regression here, no hypnotism,
Oh,
none of it.
okay.
So
Okay.
we come to this room and there are a few other monks there and he joins them and they're eating. They're eating, I could see these rounds of bread, looked like, a sourdough bread round. And they had cheese and they were drinking wine as well out of these cups. And they were kind of like look like a chalice, looked like a footed cup. They were metal. And what we got was he felt that he needed to stay undercover, first of all. He felt he was in danger, and he was really missing the camaraderie of being in a community where they were all working towards a common goal. And I said, does that mean anything to you? And he said, yeah. He said, I've recently separated from my wife. I'm living separately. I miss my wife. I miss my family. And I have a secret life with a mistress that she found out about. Okay.
Oh,
So think of the
yeah.
correlation here. Secret family, missing the community thing, missing the camaraderie. Think about when are families together the most? When they're eating dinner or eating a meal together. So
Right.
that was a script that was playing in his life. He had brought it in from a past life, and that was what was causing an energy block that we removed by illuminating it. And it allowed his energy field membrane to heal. May I explain the energy field membrane in a little more detail?
Oh, please. Yes.
Okay. When I was born and raised Catholic, Roman Catholic, 12 years Catholic school, wore saddle shoes from the time I was 5 till I was 18 when I graduated from high
Oh,
school with my
no.
uniform, right? Black and white saddle shoes.
Oh,
So
no.
the way that I was taught was that back to the way the brain's wired, I was taught that the spirit or the soul is someplace in the chest area, like in the sternum. Not what I perceived
Like
when
a
I started.
physical
Yeah,
substance
yeah,
that, like the
yeah.
way blood is in you. Oh,
Yeah,
interesting. Okay.
like, spirit, your soul is everlasting. It's going to go to heaven or it's going to go to hell, is what I was taught. All of that. My parish priest, I love this saying. He says, people are afraid when they're dying because they don't know if they're going to fly or if they're going to fry.
Oh my God, that would be
Every
a really scary thing to live with. I feel like if
Absolutely.
I never thought there was a hell. Like I'm just realizing for people, a few people reaching out, I'm like that. Like I have such empathy for people who've
Yeah.
never thought that. Oh my God,
Well,
yeah.
most people in the Western world have been taught that, in the Judeo Christian religions that have permeated, the whole Western society. So, anyways, when I started doing woo woo, that was not what I was perceiving. What I was perceiving is the spirits, the main part of us, the everlasting part, and the body's inside the spirit, Liz. And then the energy field membrane is around it. And this
Interesting.
analogy came in from spirit into my head, and I use it all the time to teach. And here's what it is. If you envision going to a pet store to buy a goldfish, they're going to put it in a plastic bag of water in order for you to get it home. Well, the fish represents our body, the water represents our spirit because the body's inside the spirit, and the plastic bag represents the energy field membrane. That's what has the hole or the tear in it that causes the energy leak that I spoke of a minute ago with the monk. So when there's a pinhole in that plastic bag with a fish in it and water's draining out a drop at a time, for a long time, that fish is going to be fine. However, when enough water drains out, that fish is going to be in trouble. And that's what happens to the human body. So we illuminate, where did that energy block begin? In this guy's case, he brought it in from a past life as a monk in the catacombs. As soon as we illuminate it, it eradicates an energy field membrane, heals, body's working on full power now, helps the body regain and maintain health. My feeling is we can fix body parts all day long, but if you're leaking power, what's the point? I think it's the most important part of an energetic healing.
Now, so then when you're doing these scans and now you're doing the medical scans, I guess it's a two-part question. Do you physically see the description you just gave?
Yeah.
And okay. And do you heal people or do you diagnose and then they would go to a traditional doctor and say, I don't know what they would say, a medical intuitive, whatever they say, hopefully a doctor would
Yeah.
at least be open enough to test.
I
Um,
would say most of them are not. Most people are not going to say, "Hey, I talked to a medical intuitive and here's what she's
yeah,
seeing." How
I
it
probably
works
wouldn't either. Mhm.
is nobody heals anybody else. No doctor, no medical provider, no acupuncture person or chiropractor, energy healer. Nobody heals anybody else. We all heal ourselves. Example, you got some big cut and you're bleeding profusely and you go to the emergency room and the emergency room doctor stitches up your cut, with sutures. That doctor ain't going to make your skin grow back. You're going to make your own skin grow back. Nobody heals anybody else. Healers like me, physicians, other medical providers, we all help facilitate the person healing themselves. You get a diagnosis from a doctor and they say, okay, you got to stop with the junk food. You got to stay away from sugar. You got to stay away from anything that's refined. That's what the doctor's getting. That's what the doctor's suggesting. Doctor can't make the person stay away from sugar. The person who's healing themselves has that prerogative to do it or not. So when I get somebody on my radar and I'm helping them with a healing, and it's spirit working through me and with me to help facilitate the person healing themselves, I'll see something. So there's a diagnosis, if you want to call it that. And then immediately thereafter, there will be some type of energetic healing that will begin. As I mentioned before, something added, something removed, something that emulates what I saw in surgery, all of that. And then most of the time, there are other things for the person to do. I'm getting information downloaded into my head. Look up this doctor, go see this, do that. So healing is a multi-pronged approach, in my opinion. We got the energy healing. We've got the physical healing. We've got the emotional
Mhm.
healing of, what is the emotional component here that's
Mhm.
in place? We just talked about the energy field membrane. So it's a multi-pronged approach. When I have a private client, they will get an email follow-up from me, Liz, and it'll have a whole bunch of reference links on it. And then I'll highlight their first action items. And there have been many times, countless times, where there's been a healing occur. And of course, I describe it to my client, whether they're calling into my show or whether it's a private client that I'm talking to on the phone or Zoom. And then I've seen many times where new body parts are formed with stem cell energy and they can show up on subsequent scans. And the doctors are going, oh, wait a minute. You had this diseased liver, and now you're coming in a month later, and your liver looks pristine and, looks like a totally new liver. And sometimes, like in kidney transplant patients or in other patients that have had their gallbladder or their uterus or whatever removed, we can regenerate those organs with stem cell energy, and they show up on the scans at the doctor's office. And the doctors, I've had several over the years call me and say, all right, what are you doing? And how does this stuff work? And so,
Um,
does that answer your question?
It does. I was actually going to ask you if there was ever anything verified by a doctor, and
Yeah.
hopefully there'll be actual scientific research done on this type. I guess the Ryan Education Center is doing a little bit, or Ryan Healing Center, one of their divisions, and hopefully there's going to be more and more studies done on this, because there is some way that I can't begin to understand how it works. Where
Well, I
yeah,
know UVA, the University of Virginia, has done a lot of research on past lives. I
yeah, oh
don't,
yeah, they've done that.
yeah,
Yeah, I
I'm
was thinking
not,
about the medical.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with the Ryan Institute. I'll look it up after we're
Mhm.
done with our chat, or maybe you can send me some information on it. I'm not familiar with them.
Oh, you'll love it. They have, I mean, they do a lot of different types of research and education, scientific evidence of an afterlife. And yeah, I don't think they do the level University of Virginia does with, I mean, in terms of studying past lives, or, Dr. Bruce Grayson on NDEs, but they teach about all of this research, and they have a division that does a lot of different studies, including an energy they study energy healing in one of
Mhm.
the sections. So I will send it to you. It's so interesting. So, and I guess I'm hoping more and more medical
Yeah.
Places
I
do more studies on this.
Hey
yeah.
everyone.
I'm really excited to let you know about the science and spirituality salons I'm now hosting. During these intimate events, a scientifically verified psychic medium will give all of you readings, and I will give a talk on the science and evidence that changed my mind about an afterlife. This will also be an amazing opportunity to get to meet some of you in person or virtually and to share more about all the science and data that transformed my worldview and got me through my worst days. These can be hosted in your home, in a nearby cafe with a private room, or they can even be virtual. I've hosted a few already, and they were really special, fascinating, emotional, evidential. So if you're interested in getting a small group together over dinner, brunch, drinks, coffee, to learn more about the science and to get evidential medium readings, send me an email at hello@wtfjusthappened.net and put science and spirituality in
Yeah,
the
I have
title.
a girlfriend who's she's in her 70s and she's a physician and she went to Dartmouth Medical School. And when she was there on her first day of class in medical school, Liz, they taught him about voodoo medicine. And she was saying, "What?" And they taught him how the brain works when they believe something and how all these cultures that, you stick pins in a voodoo doll or something like that, that people can drop dead because the belief is so strong that that can happen. This is an Ivy League school teaching them this on the first day of medical school, which still blows my mind because there weren't that many women in medical school back then and 50 years ago, and that's what they were teaching. So she said that made a huge impression on her, and that's why she's always believed that how much our thoughts come into play in disease and illness.
Placebos, you
Oh,
know?
yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Placebo studies in medicines usually have a better outcome than the medicine. It averages, and you're going to know more about this, but I've read that it averages about 52% of a positive outcome with placebo when it's pharmaceutical studies. And I've done,
Really?
oh
I
yeah,
don't know the stats at all. I just know there's
yeah,
obviously something to placebo or they wouldn't keep
yeah.
including it all the time.
Yeah.
So,
And I've done university-based research on my surgical devices. And it's a lot of work. It's hard to get that stuff approved through the Institutional Review Board, also known as the IRB, to even get a study done. And so I've been there, done that with my medical devices. I don't feel the need to do it with the intuitive healing or the energetic healing, but I'm thrilled that other people are interested in doing it. I just know the outcome that I hear from my clients.
right, right. Is there any that just shocked you where you were like, I don't know, like, I don't know, this is extreme. And then you did the healing and then it was verified, but you did say a lot of doctors have been shocked. But again, I don't know if it's okay that I ask about specific
Yeah,
cases and
yeah,
I'll
yeah,
edit out if
yeah,
not. Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah. As long as I'm not giving you the person's name and their birth date and their social security number,
Well,
no,
that
we're
was my
good.
next question. Come
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We're
on.
good. We're good. And actually, I operate under kind of like a HIPAA law. The privacy. If I'm talking to a client now, if somebody's calling into my show, they know that it's going to be on all the podcast networks and on YouTube, so they know that it's going to be public. But if it's a private client, even if another family member calls me, I'm like, yeah, I'm really sorry. I need to keep it confidential. So I honor that. But one that really sticks in my mind and has for decades, and it's an interesting example of how the healings progress based on what's happening in our human experience, is one of my girlfriends, when her daughter, who's now in her early 30s, when she was little, I believe she was 4, she was having kidney failure, and they were talking about maybe a transplant. And she was really sick. And so my friend asked me to work on her daughter, and I did. And back to my surgery experience, I watched the donor patient. This is in my mind's eye, right? It's like I'm watching a movie. I watched the donor patient. I watched this little girl, my friend's daughter. I watched the kidney get harvested, the healthy kidney get harvested out of the donor patient. I saw it get put into this little girl. I saw the diseased kidney get removed. I think she was only born with one kidney and it was diseased. So I saw it get put in. I saw the plumbing get hooked up. I saw the clamps get removed, all that stuff. So I did that healing. I think the following week they went to see the doctor. This is a pediatric nephrologist. They took scans of this little girl. He came back and he said, something's not right with the scans. We're gonna redo them. Redid them. Came back again and he said, okay, she's 4. The kidney that's showing up on the MRI, let's say, looks like the kidney of an 11 or 12-year-old, and it's perfectly healthy and normal, and all her blood values are fine.
Her
So,
own kidney. That was
yeah, it was her kidney that I watched get removed because it was diseased. And so there's this kidney. So my girlfriend's texting me going, okay, how old was the donor patient in the energetic healing that you saw? I was like, I don't know. It was under a sheet. It's like OR drapes, surgery drapes. It was all draped off. And she said, well, can you check it out? So I did. And it was a boy that looked like he was 11. I asked how old he was, and I got he was 11. And you know what? After that, that little girl was released. She never had another problem.
Wait, but the kidney had been implanted or it hadn't been implanted in her? He was planning to do it.
It
Like,
was
or you
in my mind's eye in the energetic healing. I saw the donor patient energetically. I saw
oh.
an energetic healing happen with her. She was headed towards a transplant. They were getting ready to put her on the transplant list. I watched that
Oh.
surgery performed energetically that healed her. She used it to heal herself. I didn't do it. I was just a facilitator. And and then she was fine and
So
has been
the
fine ever since.
surgery wasn't literally going on in the hospital. I
No,
assumed
what's
it was,
going on
and
in
you
my
were
head?
oh my God, I thought you were sending the energy during the surgery. And
No,
oh
no,
my
no,
God,
no, no.
that's
And I do
insane.
that all the time. I do that all the
That,
time too.
that
But
is
this is a
insane.
really interesting example is because that was 30 some years ago. Now, I never see a transplant in which there's a donor patient and there's a recipient of any organ. What I see now is new body parts generated with stem cell energy. And there will be a mold. I'm a former manufacturer of surgical devices. So we use injection molds and blow molds, plastic mold or molds to make plastic devices. So I know a little bit about them. But think of a jello mold or an ice cube tray. That's a mold too, right? So now what I see stem cell energy, which looks like a light amber colored gel with sparkles in it. It's woo woo, gotta have sparkles. And it's a watery consistency and it'll go into the mold of like a kidney or a gallbladder or an ovary or whatever. And I'll watch a vortex spinning above it and I'll watch that new body part get formed. This is all in my mind's eye. I'm watching the energetic healing telepathically. And then I'll watch the diseased body part get removed and I'll watch the new stem cell energy generated body part get put in place. I'll watch the plumbing get hooked up again with sutures and see the clamps removed and that kind of stuff. And it's remarkable the stories about that happening. And I mentioned before where they don't have any more symptoms. And sometimes it shows up on scans. I talked to a person a couple of days ago where 3 years ago we regenerated her spleen. She was in a car accident. She had her spleen removed, and we regenerated her spleen with stem cell energy. And it showed up the following year on an MRI. And she said, I haven't had any symptoms since then. I said, I know. Can't make this stuff up.
These are types of predictions too, where we will be able to use stem cells to that level shortly. I know they're doing early level
Oh,
work with stem cells. As far as I know, you can't do that yet, but you think we're going to be able to soon.
absolutely. I think what was happening with early on when I started doing this medical intuitive stuff, I would see the donor patient and I see the donor organ get harvested and all that kind of stuff. Well, stem cells were not part of the zeitgeist yet for the common person. Most people have heard of stem cells, even if they don't understand what they are. And so, as that was starting to change and became part of our vernacular, then I started seeing stem cells get used. And that's what I see all the time now. And it's interesting because what I believe I'm seeing is just a healing happening in warp speed of what our bodies have the ability to do. Because if we go back to our grade school science lessons, we learned every cell has a nucleus, every nucleus is surrounded by cytoplasm, which is a watery gel, which is what I see. It reminds me of Dippity Doo, which was this hair gel when I was a kid in the 60s and 70s. And so I always say, it looks like Dippity Doo, which is fun to say. And so I'll see, the healing happen with that. And then as I'm learning about new medical techniques and new medical devices, as I mentioned before, oftentimes I'll see a healing utilize a device or methodology that I haven't seen before. And it's very common to hear me say, "Oh, this is cool. I haven't seen this before." And it's like I'm seeing a new healing, and then it's part of my repertoire. I'll see it again, going forward on other clients. But it's fascinating with the stem cells because stem cells have been used outside of the US for a really long time. That's why you'll see all the top athletes in the world, they'll go to Germany or they'll go to Costa Rica or someplace when they've got a torn Achilles or something like that, and they'll heal in record time. Well, it's because they're using stem cells. Furthermore, I've read the research of a scientist in San Diego named Dr. Todd Okavades, where he will inject stem cells and he'll use a laser beam to line up where he wants the cells to go. Let's say he wants the cells to go to somebody's liver. They'll shine a laser on the liver, and on fluoroscopy, they can watch those cells migrate through the body and line up perfectly in a line inside the liver. It's fantastic, the stuff that is being invented and being discovered and all of that.
Oh, medicine is so fascinating and
Yeah.
so exciting. And I think I'm just excited to see how it's going to evolve over the next however many years. And you look back 100 years ago, it's like science fiction level compared to what they had 100 years ago. And in 100 years, it'll be the same thing, the science fiction level of what we have now, it'll seem like science fiction to us the way.
Well, the other thing too is with this energy healing and the skill sets that I have and that I teach as far as the energy healing, oftentimes things can be identified that don't show up on the medical scans. For example, somebody that has a plethora of symptoms that don't seem to correlate with one another. And the client will go to multiple doctors and they'll get multiple diagnoses and multiple treatment forms and multiple whatever. Lyme disease is a great example of this. People are diagnosed with Lyme. They're given massive amounts of antibiotics. I had one client that was on 5 antibiotics at the same time. She was sicker than a dog. She was not getting better. She came to me and I had a consult with her over the phone. She was full of mold. She was full of black mold. Well, that didn't show up on any of the tests that any of the doctors or the hospitals were running. But boy, I got her on my radar and that showed up first in my mind's eye. And I said, "You are full of black mold. Where's the mold?" She said, "We got a mold problem in my house." I go, "Well, you got to fix that because that's making you sick." The other thing that's interesting about that, and I see this a lot, is the symptoms from Lyme are simultaneously the same as the symptoms from mold exposure. And oftentimes, a huge percentage of the time, I've read in the 90% of the time when Lyme is diagnosed, it's misdiagnosed mold, which is why the patient doesn't get better. So they come to me, I can get them on my radar. I've got a hologram of them in my mind's eye. And I'm like, "Okay, you're full of mold." I had a late physician who was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. I went to her for 15 years. She was in Los Angeles. And she called me one day. She said, I've just been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. Can you scan me and see what's going on? Again, I said, you're full of black mold. What's going on with the mold? She said, yeah, I live in a house near the beach in Santa Monica and I don't have the money to remediate it. And I said, well, it's mold's a carcinogen, not to mention all the other things that can happen. So there's another physician with whom I worked who was an ER physician living in Santa Barbara and couldn't get out of bed, was on disability, hadn't worked in a few years. Nobody could figure out what the heck was wrong with him. I talked with his father. His father set up a call with me. I said, you are full of mold, and sent him in the follow-up email, okay, here are some links that you can use to go get a test. His dad did that. I got him in touch with a professor at the University of Virginia. He did it. It was diagnosed mold. The guy's back to work. So yes, medical technology is fantastic. I'm all for it. I'm fascinated by it. I'm an inventor of it. And yes, the basics sometimes are overlooked because if a test doesn't show it, it doesn't mean it's real. And that's a mistake that the medical industry is making, in my opinion.
From everything I've heard, I agree with that. Yeah. Yeah. Wow. There's a lot of, I mean, I don't understand this too long, but yeah, there's a lot of stuff I hear of that they can't diagnose chronic illnesses. So
Yeah.
hopefully, again, I go back to hopefully adding more of this, what you're doing into research.
Yeah.
I'm just asking you a random question because this is my paranoia a little.
Yeah.
Are you microplastics and effects in people now? I'm hearing our bodies are all filled with microplastics now.
Even newborns have microplastics in them because it gets into the fetus when they're in utero. Uh, yeah, I think that our bodies can adapt. I think we want to limit it as much as possible. And it's all the evolution of how we create. When we know what we don't want, it helps us create what we do want. So I think we minimize that. It's like same thing, seed oils, processed food, toxins, in our oceans. I mean, you live in New York City, the Hudson River used to be super polluted. And now lots of agencies have come together to clean that up over the past 20 years. And I think that that's how we progress. When we know what we don't want, it helps us figure out how can we get what we do want to make it better for everybody.
Now, I want to ask you a really specific question. I know you focus on something called the 12 phases of transition. What
Mhm.
are those?
When we're dying, when everybody dies, whether we die instantly, like in a case of a homicide or suicide, or whether we're dying over a prolonged period of time, days, weeks, months, years, we all are surrounded by angels and the spirits of deceased loved ones and pets as we're transitioning. And there is university-based research that shows that 90% of people at the end of their lives see the spirits of deceased loved ones and pets, and it's comforting to them. It's very common for somebody, let's say, who's elderly. We were at a funeral earlier this week, my husband and I, for a man who was 100, and he died and he lived a great life. And his family told me at the reception after the funeral that he did see his deceased parents' spirits. He was talking to his mother. Well, his mother's been dead for like 80 years or something. She died when he was young, and they thought he was hallucinating. Well, Grandpa wasn't hallucinating. Grandpa could actually see the spirit. And that's what the university-based research shows. I love it when science catches up with woo-woo because woo-woo's been around a whole lot longer. So
Right.
the phases of transition are the configuration that the angels and deceased loved ones and spirits of pets are in as the person's approaching the end of their life. I find, Liz, that there's lots of information on past lives. There's lots of information on grieving, the phases of grief, all of that. Even lots of information on near-death experiences and the afterlife, but not much information on what happens as we're actually dying. And that's the scariest part for people because it's the unknown. And when we're going through that with a loved one, we can't help but think, oh my God, I'm going to be there one day myself. and it makes us face our own mortality.
Yeah, which we have terrors of, and hopefully we're learning more and more. It's not something to be scared of. I guess some
Right.
people say it's just stepping into another room. Are you allowed to talk about you worked with police cases and CI?
No, I haven't gotten
No.
into it that deeply because that's not my wheelhouse.
Okay.
My wheelhouse is helping people heal, whether that be
Mm-hmm.
medically or emotionally, because also university-based research shows, and I've had people on my show that talk about this who've done the research. There's a gal that I had on, and her name's Lenore Matthews. She's a PhD, and she used to work at the UN, and she
She's a
has.
good friend of mine. I
Oh,
know
she
her really.
is?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, terrific. Oh,
She's been
give her
on.
my
She's
love.
wonderful.
She's
I will. She's
wonderful.
been
Yeah.
on this. We met through this world. We haven't actually even met in person, but she's one of
Yeah.
my good friends in this whole world. So I
Yeah.
love her. She's
Isn't she a
wonderful.
doll?
Yes.
Yeah. But
Yes.
she has shown in her research that the number one way to help somebody who's grieving is to be able to help them talk to their deceased loved ones' spirits. That's what I do. Dr. Chris Kerr, who's an MD, PhD, and he's a hospice director, same thing. He's the one that did university-based research at the University of Buffalo. And he's the one that showed that 90% of people at the end of their lives see the spirits of deceased loved ones and pets. So the science is catching up with woo-woo. And to skeptics, and I'm a skeptic. You tell me something, I'm like, I don't know that feels right. I need to know more about it. I think that is helping people at least say, well, maybe it's feasible, but I need to know more instead of just, I don't believe that. That's a bunch of malarkey. I don't believe that at all. And I say, that's fine. Just because you don't believe something doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Number one. And number two, if you want to talk about it, fine. If you don't, we'll talk about something else. What do you want to talk about? Football, the weather, whatever. Doesn't matter. I don't feel
All
like I need to convince anybody of any of this stuff at this stage in my life
right.
because
Okay.
I've worked with tens of thousands of people over the years. And yeah, I know it's
Yeah.
real.
That's encouraging. Yeah, you like hearing the knowing. I still am a little on the fence despite all this hopeful, more hopeful than I've ever been in my life. I think there's a preponderance of evidence, but there's still moments I'm like, yeah. I mean, it's
What are you
scary because I
afraid of
just,
with it? What's scary with you about it?
um, permanent obliteration of myself and my loved ones.
What do you mean by that? Like you've been
But
watching sci-fi movies and the
no,
aliens are
just
coming?
no, that consciousness is a function of a brain. And once your brain stops functioning, you cease to exist at all. And so do your loved ones. I don't think that's the probable answer anymore, but I still have an anxiety that that is the answer.
Yeah. Oh
And
God.
that's just very sad to me if
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
the
yeah.
case.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. It's just, you're moving on your path and it's going to move in a way that's going to best benefit you and facilitate whatever it is your spirit wants to explore and experience. I mean, there's so much information out there
Mhm.
about and university-based research that's saying, okay, here's what this patient's deceased mother is telling him that's so random. And I have thousands of stories like that there's no way we could know. And there's no way I could know. And it means something to the person with whom we're working. It's called evidential mediumship, where there's information. I had a story happen earlier this week. May I share it with you?
Yeah, that was actually my question. Share one of your evidential
Yeah. Yeah,
experiences.
yeah.
Yes.
This was fun. I talked on Monday to a client who had just lost her husband, and her son, her mid 20 something son, was on the call too. And he was an only child, so his dad had died. A couple months ago, they had his celebration of life service on Sunday. So they were sad. They were really sad in the throes of grief, obviously. So we get the dad spirit on the line. I connect to the dad spirit, and people, I think, when they first connect with their deceased loved ones, imagine that the loved one's going to give them some big philosophical or theological life meaning something, something that's going to be like the key to something esoteric that's a huge life changing sentence. I never get that from spirit, ever. I've never seen it. They come in with stuff that's going to be real basic, that's going to mean something to their loved ones, to let the loved ones know that it's really them with who we're conversing. So this guy's spirit, let's call him John. John says to me in this voice, I hear it in my head. He says, ask him about the turtle, just like that. And I'm thinking, that's random. I think that all the time, but I don't edit what I get. I just say it. And 99.99999% of the time, it means something to the person who's my client. So I said to this woman and her son, he wants me to ask you about the turtle. And they both started laughing hysterically. And I said, what? And they said, we had a tortoise show up in our backyard many years ago. It weighed about 15 pounds. We called it Toby. And then when Toby laid a bunch of eggs, we changed his name to Tobitha. And Tobitha was the family pet. And my husband used to get up from the dinner table every night with table scraps, and he'd go out in the backyard and he'd feed Tobitha. And that pet turtle lived with us for such a long time, like over 15 years. And he was so attached to the turtle. So what's he doing? What's John's spirit from heaven doing? Number one, he knows his family's suffering in their grief and they're really sad. So what's he doing? He's lightening them up with something to make them laugh. And he's citing something. There's no way I would know about it. I never talked to these people before. That meant something to them and could be something that only they would understand. And I have thousands and thousands of stories like that.
Thank you. And
You're
that's
welcome.
a really adorable story too. And
I think so too.
yeah, I know some of my listeners question the same thing I do. So hopefully this adds.
I have another fun story. May I share it?
Yeah.
Do we have time?
Oh, yes. Oh,
okay.
Yes, please.
All right. I was talking to a woman and her deceased husband's spirit in heaven, and she was in deep grief. And she was saying, I don't get any signs from him. I don't feel him. I don't hear him. Well, when you're in grief, you're not gonna, because grief is a low vibration. Grief feels bad. And spirit doesn't communicate on the I feel crappy channels because the vibration's too low. Spirit's vibration is really high because they don't have the density of a body to slow down their vibration like we humans do. So we asked her husband for a sign, and he said, look for the peacock. And she said, looking for the peacock? That doesn't mean anything to me. I live in Boston. We don't have peacocks here. I said, I'm just saying. That's what he wants you to do. Look for the peacock. The peacock may be on a TV. You may see it a picture in a magazine. You may see it on the side of a van. You may see it in a piece of jewelry. Just be open to how you're going to see the peacock. Because when spirit gives us a sign, it may make sense to us right at that moment. It may make sense really, if it doesn't at the moment, it may make sense later when we think about it. We go, oh, that's what he was thinking, he was talking about. Or it may pertain to something that hasn't happened yet. So I get off the phone with this woman, my client in Boston. She emails me about 5 minutes later, and she said, as soon as I hung up with you, I went to my Facebook page just to check in. And the first thing that showed up was this huge picture of a peacock with all of his feathers extended. And so I said, so he's giving you an example of something that's totally random that you don't understand. And he gave it to you quickly, saying, okay, I'm going to send you a peacock. And within 5 minutes, you see a peacock. That's how they work.
And you brought two animals. And if you have, do you have a little more time? It's been a little over an hour.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You connect with people's animals who've passed away too, right?
Yeah.
Or you do animal healings. I know you do something with
both.
Animals. Both. Okay.
Yeah.
Both. So you can heal animals that have medical conditions. And
I don't heal anybody. I help the animal heal itself. Yeah.
Okay. So with a sick animal. Oh, good. Yeah. I actually did try. I didn't know you at the time. I did try some of that with my animals, and they, like, one vet did once say she was really surprised how my cat was getting better, couldn't explain it. And another time a woman moved the time. It was distant healing on my dog when, it was close to the end of her life, but she didn't tell me she moved the session. And I came home. I was expecting the session the next day. My dog, I was like, oh my God, my dog's feeling great. She was jumping around, like seemed so much healthier. And then I checked my email. She's like, I hope this was okay. I felt like a need to do it a little earlier and I just did it. And it was really amazing. I always thought that was pretty evidential.
Yeah.
What is it a different experience for you when you connect with an animal, both in terms of healing and psychic medium readings, than it is connecting with a human? And if so, how?
Well, the animal's not going to talk to me about a math problem or something they're developing or something they're cooking, all the human experience. But the animal's going to tell me. I had a couple people call in last night, actually, one from the UK and one from somebody else, someplace else, Australia, maybe, because I was talking to both of them in the future with the time change. It was Thursday night at my reality, and it was already Friday in their reality. And they both had things going on with the cats, and the cats were telling us what was causing their symptoms. And so they'll tell us that. We'll say, I had a client last week. It was so funny, Liz. It was a little foo-foo dog named Lulu. And Lulu's mom said, ask her if there's anything, that she wants to tell me. And Lulu, the dog, and she was like, I don't know, a Shih Tzu or a Maltese or something like that. And little Lulu said, tell my mommy I love her so much that I could lick her to death. And my client said, oh my God, this dog licks me. It makes me nuts. She said, tell her to stop licking me so much. I said, all right, well, she's just showing you how much she loves you. So I get fun information like that. We'll get if there's something going on the show. Last night we worked on a cat's DNA. And so I described that on the show. And I think I said something like, oh my God, I don't know that I've ever worked on a cat's DNA before. And the DNA strand is so little compared to the human DNA that I get to work on all the time and described what I was seeing. So yeah, all the time. Uh, they'll tell me if they want another blanket. They'll tell me if they need a new bed. They'll tell me there was one of the cats last night. She was having an allergic reaction to some things, and I was getting it was the chemicals that were being used on a lawn or in a garden. And the woman said, no, we don't. This cat gets to go out in our garden, but we don't use any chemicals out there. So, well, she's allergic to something. And then what came in, Liz, which was really interesting, was the cat had been exposed to fertilizer chemicals when it was in utero, when it was a fetus, and the mom cat had been exposed to it. And so it came through and was part of the DNA mutation. And I'll see DNA get corrected when there's a mutation in it in humans and in animals. See it in my mind's eye. And it was, we came up with that. So came up with some ways for the cat to not have a histamine response when it was exposed to certain things.
And I'm asking you a super, super random question. I don't expect you to be able to answer it correctly. So it's a little speculative. And I'm asking you because you explained somehow you think all this could technically work and you do devices. Do you think there's going to be a device like a large hadron collider or a device at some point, probably not in this lifetime, that's going to be able to measure the particle that stores this information and our consciousness out of a body or the energy fields you see? And
I get that it already exists in some form. It already exists. I'm starting to get divine downloads before you even ask the question all the way out. I get that it already exists. We just don't know about it.
But some humans do and made it, or it exists and it's something and we don't know how to use it that way.
Some humans have made it and they're still in the testing, so they've not released the information yet.
And like on this planet, not another. I'm sure the multiple solar systems, there's other. Wow. Well,
and it's in Europe.
It's in Europe. Mm-hmm. And it's not the Large Hadron Collider.
No. but it's along those lines, and it's much smaller. It's a much smaller device.
I'm open, and I hope in like 2 years we get to text and you're like, see, I really hope.
Yeah.
And
I do work with inventors and business people like CEO level and C-suite level when they're developing new things and we get information, and also scientists. I've worked with a geneticist who is the head of a very large institute, and I can give him information where spirit will guide us and guide him into what to tell his scientists to look in this direction, check this out, do that. A lot of this stuff that's being developed, I mean, everybody that's developing this stuff's getting information downloaded from spirit. We're all channeling. Every person channels information from spirit, from the collective consciousness is what it's called. I'm using air quotes here. But we're all, every author, when you wrote your book, I'm sure you had times where you thought, you went back and you read something, you thought, oh, this is really good. I don't really even remember writing this. We're all channeling. Every author, every composer, every screenwriter, every artist, every musician, we're all channeling. What are we going to eat for breakfast today? We're all being guided, but most of us are very busy and we don't pay attention to our guidance. We've all had gut feelings on things and it didn't make sense from an intellectual standpoint. So we went the opposite direction and then we ended up regretting it.
multiple times. Yeah. So, and our society teaches us at a young age to not listen to that. It's like,
That's right.
oh, you're being mean that you don't like that person. You should give them a chance. Or, oh, this is a good opportunity. Or this school is going to be really good for you, even if it doesn't feel right. Like, there's
Yeah.
so many. Don't leave out that kid. They all hurt their feelings. And, then there's reasons you end up like, hurt in a lot of those situations, or learning
Yeah.
learning also to turn it off.
Well, and feelings are an internal GPS system. We all come in equipped with it. And when we turn it off, that's like the worst thing that we can do. If there's a little child that doesn't want to hug Uncle Harvey, trust that kid's intuition. Something's up with Uncle Harvey. If you see
Exactly.
that there are animals in the room and no animal will go near Uncle Harvey, pay attention to that. There's something up there.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree completely. So you were trained in all of this. Is there anything, what was that experience like, or anything that you want to share about that experience?
Well, as I mentioned, it was 6 years. I spent the equivalent of what I would have paid to get an MD or a PhD on that. And when I was in the middle of it 30 years ago, my family and friends said, "Why are you doing this?" I said, "I don't know." And they'd say, "What are you going to do with it?" I said, "Again, I have no idea. It's just, it's interesting and I'm being led to learn it." And now here, fast forward, I sold my medical device manufacturing company in 2015. And I thought, okay, now what? And here I am doing this full time and having a ball doing it. So, as I mentioned in communication, we went from the carrier pigeon to now it's instantaneous with our phones. We can be in communication with anybody anywhere in the world instantaneously. And that's where the training has progressed. So, in my training, I work with people and teach them the buffet of psychicness in a weekend, and it's remarkable how they can learn that. I also have an online training that's self-paced that somebody can do that's very basic, that talks about how to communicate with spirit. They learn to communicate with spirit and about the 12 phases of transition and what happens when somebody's dying. The key to both of them is there are live practice groups multiple times a week, because you can go to a lecture, you can read a book, you can listen to a podcast, but until you experience it and do it yourself, that's when it really integrates. The more you do it, the more you talk to spirit, the more validation you get, the more validation you get, the more you trust it. And then it just becomes second nature. So I'm very adamant about these practice groups that come along with the training and how important they are. They're essential. most trainings that I see do not involve practice. And I think practice is the key. You can learn how to throw a football, but it doesn't mean you're going to be Tom Brady and be, the winningest quarterback in NFL history. He threw that football a lot of times to get to that point. And that's how all of this works too. Everybody can learn it. Everybody's doing it. Everybody has the ability to do it.
Lastly, you are offering a really kind gift to all listeners. What is the gift?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
how can people get it?
Okay. So, Angelic Attendants, what really happens as we transition from this life into the next is my book that talks about what happens. And it has diagrams in it. You can see how the angels and the deceased loved ones are positioned and all that. Anybody that wants a free copy of this, just go to julieryangift.com and just say you heard me on Liz's show, and we'll send you a free digital and audiobook download. And listen to it, read it. If you want to share it with your family and friends, please do. There are many, many people that give this book as a gift to somebody who's either lost a loved one or they're in the throes of one of their loved ones at the end of their lives. And it helps them navigate that with a sense of wonder. And there's a glorious component to this that gives them a lot of comfort. And furthermore, there were many, many churches and synagogues across the country of all denominations that give this book to every family that comes in to plan a funeral or a memorial service. So that's kind of my mission, is to get this information out there, and free is a good way to get it out there.
Wonderful. Oh, that's really kind. So thank you for that. And now, if someone wants to book a session, first of all, if they don't live near you, do you do them virtually, your sessions?
100% are done virtually.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Either phone, or if somebody's abroad, then we'll do it via Zoom. But it's all virtual. I could find
Great.
you even if you were in a galaxy far, far away, because it's all energy.
Ooh, we'll have to do one of those experiments once we colonize the moon. Let's see. That's probably the
Right.
farthest away we're going to be in this lifetime. So thank you so much. And where can they find you and follow you and listen to your? You have a lot of interviews as well and a podcast. So
Everything's at askjulieryan.com. Ask Julie Ryan. You can even get the free book there. It's just on the homepage. It'll say, click this button and you'll get a free book. Sign up for a free, just put your email in so we can send it to you. And my show is Ask Julie Ryan. We're on all the podcast networks anywhere. And we are also on YouTube. I do a live show every Thursday night at 8 Eastern for an hour, and it's Ask Julie Ryan. And people call in from all over the world. And also they're on the live stream on YouTube. And so they're submitting a question in the chat. And I scan people. We can talk about your health. We can talk about your pet's health. We can talk to your dead grandma. We can talk to your spirit guides, your angels. We can do a past life. I mean, anything you want to do from the buffet of psychicness. So it's really fun, Liz, because I never know who's going to call. I never know what their question's going to be. I never know what spirit's going to say and what the healing is that's going to happen, whether it be emotional or physical or some other area. And it's so much fun. It's such a joy to get to work with people from all over. And when I remember that spirit is pure love, I walk around and I feel good most of the time because I'm hanging out with spirit, and it's a really high vibe and it's a blast.
if you want to learn how I went from being a skeptical atheist who thought there was zero chance of an afterlife to a skeptical atheist who thinks an afterlife is highly probable, come check out my books. WTF Just Happened. To get more information on what the fuck just happened, go to WTFJustHappened.net. There you can order my book, WTF Just Happened, A Sciencey Skeptic Explores Grief, Healing, and Evidence of an Afterlife. You can learn all about how I came to conclude that there most likely is an afterlife, but you can also learn about the early stages of my grief and the amazing, fascinating people I met along the way. You can read about how much I harassed the mediums and scientists trying to get evidence to see if the mediums were cheating and see if what everyone was saying actually was true. You can also subscribe to our newsletter to stay updated on any new developments and any interesting new what the fuck updates. So if you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review us wherever you get your podcasts. It makes such a difference, especially for a new podcast like this one. And if any of you have had a crazy what the fuck yourself, have any questions, feedback, or just want to say hey, reach out on either Instagram at WTF_just_happened_, or email me at hello@WTFjusthappened.net. I love hearing from all of you. It makes my day hearing your stories and questions and feedback and all of it. And remember, you don't have to draw any final conclusions as you wonder, what the fuck just happened?